Welcome back to the Peak Sports Psychiatry Podcast. I'm Dr. Mark Allen, here alongside my co-host, Dr. Tommy Horn.
And today we've got a guest who is hitting it out of the park when it comes to athlete mental health.
I love how corny we are. We're thrilled to welcome Dr. Tess Palmateer, the mental health coordinator for the New York Mets.
Tess's journey was incredible. She was a college volleyball player at Brock University in Canada, went on to complete her master's in sports psychology at the University of Toronto, and earned her PhD at the University of North Texas. Go Mean Green.
She trained at the Oklahoma Sports Psychology Consortium, then became the first ever director of athlete mental health and performance at Florida Atlantic University, building programs from the ground up.
And now she's working right inside the clubhouse with the Mets, supporting players through the grind of a 162-game season.
We're excited to dig into her path, hear about her insights from both the collegiate and professional levels, and of course, sneaks in some baseball talk along the way. Tess, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thrilled to be here.
So Tess, let's start with your journey. What first drew you to sports psychology, and what's kept you passionate about this work?
Yeah, it all goes back to my time as a collegiate athlete. I was struggling a little bit on the court with my confidence, and my dad, who was a former professional hockey player, was a scout at the time, he introduced me to a sports psychologist that he was working with to help with their draft selection process, and thought maybe you could pick up some insight from her. I had no idea what I wanted to be after I finished volleyball, but as soon as I met with her, I thought, this is it. I was studying psychology at the time, grew up playing sports and watching sports. And so when I found a way to marry these two passions together, it seemed like a perfect fit. What keeps me going, what I love about this career is every day is so different. Every athlete we talk to has a really different story. So I'm kind of always on my toes and always learning. How fun is it that we get to celebrate the wins along the way? So that's it in short, I would say.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And you've worked in so many different environments, Tess. So, you were an athlete yourself, then you were in graduate training and you had this passion already fueling you. Then you were at Florida Atlantic and now pro baseball. So what are some of the biggest turning points along that path?
Yeah. Grad school was really great because you learn the new identity of trying to see things as a psychologist, or at least a psychologist in training. I had been a coach, I had been an athlete, but it's a very different way to kind of see sport and observe what's happening around you. So I think that was really pivotal in my development. Then stepping into my role at FAU, I felt very fortunate. I was able to step into a director role, which meant impacting policy, moving beyond the one-to-one care, but really thinking at the systems level, what does this look like? Then here at the Mets, that was a new challenge for me because I was really thrust into one sport, and admittedly a sport that I was not as intimately involved with as an athlete or even as a fan. And so learning the baseball culture, the terminology, and some of the unique challenges, as you mentioned, of a 162-game season, that was also a pretty big learning curve for me.
62 games is quite the slog. I look forward to talking about that in a little bit. At Florida Atlantic, though, let's go back to college. How did you approach screening the athletes for their mental health needs, either when they first arrived on campus or as part of ongoing prevention?
Yeah, that was one of the first policies that I put into place when I got up to FAU, given it was that one of the NCAA best practices that were put out in 2016. And so my approach was to have all of our student athletes complete a virtual screener. So it was really easy. I would do an introduction to myself, the resources available to them, why someone would be interested in services, try to break down stigma a little bit. And then I would put up a QR code, have them complete this survey that was confidential. Only I was going to be seeing the results and the other staff that were doing some of the follow-ups. But we did that right when they arrived to campus, or as early as I could. And then we actually had follow-ups with all athletes who hit a pre-identified threshold. So if they endorsed a certain number of items on our questionnaire, or if they simply asked to meet with us for either a performance or mental health reason. One unique thing that we did, which was really great, was we also asked about learning disabilities and ADHD to ensure if they needed accommodations, we could help them get supported. But as you're probably aware, in the NCAA, there are the stimulant waiver you would need to get. So wanting to make sure that if they did in fact have ADHD, needed treatment from a medication perspective, we were buttoned up. So that's sort of the screening process. But then what I think was a big strength of what we had done was those individual meetings with players. That gave us an opportunity to really sit down and have a conversation, create a little bit of a relationship, show them that this isn't weird or bad or whatever kind of preconceived notion. We can just sit and have a conversation. And sometimes it would be fun too, where if as a volleyball player, I can share that I was a volleyball player or whatever it might be, to sort of say we're a little more similar. And then after that, no player was really required to meet with me, but often after those conversations with myself or the intern or the other colleague that was helping out with this, we did have a lot of players express interest, or maybe weeks or months down the road, they knew how to get a hold of us. They knew where our office was already.
What was the completion rate on that survey, on that QR survey after the virtual screen? Because I love that face-to-face interaction. And is there a comparison before you started doing that? Sometimes it's hard to get athletes to buy into even doing that.
Yes, we did say that it was an athletic department policy in which they had to do this for their own benefit, of course. But how we approached it was part of our introduction meetings with all teams. So, compliance would speak, our academic advising group, athletic training, and I would just be the last one and say, here, you got to do this. And sometimes, admittedly, it was a little bit tricky. Sometimes submitting it, people would maybe exit out a little bit too early. So we just said, make sure you show us. This is your ticket out of here. Make sure you've completed it. So pretty much everybody had to do it because they had to be at these compliance meetings at the beginning of the year. So that was part of the strategy too. Of we don't necessarily want to create an additional meeting. How can we leverage an existing meeting for these athletes? Because it's already
Absolutely.
overwhelming when they first
Yeah.
get to campus.
Well, time is so valuable and they have so many places to go, but you standardize the process. And in doing so, I think you mentioned decreased stigma. And Mark and I have talked to other guests about how mandatory mental health screenings is the right thing to do because it's part of that pre-participation routine. And when you make it normalized like that, you put mental health right there on par with their physical health needs. And you mentioned prior to 2016, there was no best practices, right? So you're kind of creating that best practice. But with your time there in collegiate athletics, how did that, evolve over the years you were there? Did it become, less stigmatized, more access as you were there?
I think mental health services, I was pretty blown away by how immediately I was embraced. But I do say that was in part due to a colleague who was in the athletic department part-time ahead of my being there. So I think he had laid a really great foundation so that when I arrived, people knew what a sports psychologist was and how I could support. So I remember my first maybe month or so was really getting our policies set up, making sure we're good with legal and the counseling center and so forth. And when I said, okay, doors are open, I'm available to see folks, my caseload was nearly full in a week. Then as I started spending more time with teams, doing more team sessions, just became more and more normal. And I can recall going to a football lunch and somebody on their way out saying, hey, Tess, are we at 2 or 3? Mind you, they're shouting this around 30, 40, 60 teammates. But then the guy beside me turns and says, wait, how do I set up a meeting? So it's pretty cool that some of these players were as open as they were.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier that you had some help, that you had an intern and you had someone else that was doing the work. And if I remember correctly, Florida Atlantic has about 500-ish student athletes. So how did you split it up and divvy up the work because as you mentioned, your caseload was nearly almost completely full. And then with recent studies, 35% plus utilization rate of student athletes actually seeking mental health services, it's a lot of people to actually serve.
It was a learning process. I'll be honest about that. At first, you get excited. Wow, no one on the men's soccer team had reached out. Of course, I'll take on this new client. And oh gosh, I've been working to build this player's trust for so long and finally they're ready. Of course, I'll take them on. And so what I really had to do going into my second year, because that was not effective long-term at all. Going into my second year, I was much more strategic. The first thing was limiting how many team sessions I can do, because that is also direct clinical hours. So limiting the number of team sessions I could do for each team on campus. In addition to that, became really good at making effective referrals to my colleagues in the counseling center. So I felt very, very pleased with how I was placed on campus. And by that, I mean, I was technically a counseling center staff. However, I was also fully embedded in athletics. So with being a counseling center staff, I was able to build relationships with the other mental health providers there, get to know them personally, get to understand what their areas of specialization were. And so I was able to make really effective referrals. So if a student athlete came in, really wanting to get some support with, let's say, past trauma they had experienced, I was able to say, hey, you should really talk to my colleague. She's our expert in trauma and works with a lot of our student athletes. Heard nothing but good things. I'd love to set you up with her. If you can say it in a way where they really buy in and you're talking, this is our go-to person for student athletes, they don't really question it. And that means they're getting set up with the best care. Now, if it was a performance concern, they were really wanting to dive into more of the traditional sports psychology or mental skills, that's where we would stay kind of in with those who had that specific training. So
Amen.
really trying to leverage the referrals on campus was a big one.
Yeah, quick follow-up on that, because you talked about system level change, and it's hard, I think, to triage. Where do folks need to go? And that's exactly what you were doing there. What do you enjoy more? Is it the individual athlete, whether you're talking mental skills or doing traditional therapy, or systems level approach? Because I think we talked, Mark, to Dr. Auerbach, and
Mhm.
I think the comment was made that, my success is not based on how many individual therapy sessions I have with patients or clients. It's really about, preventing that and getting involved on a system level, being part of the culture to prevent that. But what would you say? What do you like more, the system or the one-on-one individual care?
I'm going to have a greedy answer and say I really like both,
Okay.
right? I think it would be hard for me to fully step away from the individual clinical work because that is just so meaningful to me. And at the same time, when I'm able to do, let's say, an education for staff so they know how to help them get connected to resources, or they're mindful about how they're communicating with players, those sorts of things I think go a really long way. So yeah, again, the sort of greedy answer, maybe the not having to choose, but I really like both.
I'm with you. It's why we got into it, right? We like working with people, and now if we can affect the systems, which can affect and help more people, that's great. It's even better. But
Hmm.
speaking on that term greed, a little bit of a segue, NIL money. How were you there when it had started to change the landscape? And if so, what did you kind of notice with the culture?
I would say I was there very much in its infancy. I don't know exactly when NIL policy came into effect, but I was out of collegiate athletics in, 2023. So I guess it was probably only a couple of years into it, perhaps. So I was starting to hear things, folks talking about their brand and being mindful of what they're posting on social media, some having smaller deals like at the local smoothie spot where they posted and they'd get free smoothies. But then, of course, you heard folks talking about transferring for tens of thousands of dollars and being promised deals and so forth. So we were starting to get a little more education in our department, but that was also an adjustment that needed to be made of we didn't have someone who was an expert in NIL and talking to folks about branding. And so there was very much there's a new need here and we need to figure out what resources we have to support them. But I mentioned the brand and social media, and I think that's really important to highlight because while building your brand and having a presence on Instagram or TikTok can be really great in connecting, you get to know your fans and they really appreciate you. That also leaves you pretty vulnerable to some of the negative feedback or abuse online. So I think that would be something that I would be mindful of, or at least concerned of, or at least asking players, I suppose.
Yeah, Tess, I think you and I were in New York. Was that a couple years ago when our friend Dr. Jeff Russer from Notre Dame, good Notre Dame
Mm-hmm.
shout out there, was talking about that, right? Talking about the impact of social media on mental health and performance, and players who were, swapping their phones after games to, screen the social media content, direct messaging, things like that. But I think even since then, NIL has taken on a life that it's even greater. So what do you think? And I know you're more in professional sports now, but at the collegiate level, how is that going to shift the way athletic departments think about how they support athletes who have all these financial pressures now that maybe they didn't used to have, or maybe not pressure, but financial consideration, in addition to that social media consideration?
My thinking would be hopefully we can have opportunity to set players up with some financial education, because if someone just gave me $1 million, I don't know if I'd know exactly how to handle it. And I'm a little bit out of undergrad at this point. So I can't imagine how an 18-year-old might feel if they're offered quite a bit of money. So that I think would be part of it. Again, kind of thinking to the social media abuse and the commentary. I think what's really challenging is, and you see it in the pro sports space, of people being overpaid or overrated. As we add money, it's another way to sort of evaluate someone's worth. And I think NIL is a little bit interesting because it's not really all performance based, right? It's what your presence is on social media. Sometimes it's how funny you are or what kind of pictures you're posting. Always rewarding performance, but that is just another complicating factor. So my hope is that if there is distress caused by NIL, or the feedback they're getting, or, the comparisons, not just between teams, but even within teams, why am I getting paid
Yeah.
less than my peer over here? My hope is that that's something that's being talked about by the mental health staff too. Like, hey, we're here to support you through the distress. I won't give you financial advice, but, I can sit here and say, gosh, that's a lot to be sitting with on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear, wide receivers complaining about who got the ball more than the other, but then also then now we have the conversation about like who's getting paid more from NIL money. Now, some of the work I've done, at least in the college space, where it's where NIL has become a factor, and then with the social media presence, is what is the athlete's actual priority? Is it more for why they got into it in the first place with participating in sport, or is it that their social media presence has become such a factor that they actually really want to focus more on that? And that's true. It's like we need to do more values-based work and kind of find a path forward. Are they conflicting? Do we need to shut off the social media for a little bit, or at least pare it back down? Do you need to get a social media team to handle it for you? So anyway, I think that's fodder for a future discussion.
Yeah.
So I did want to take a deeper dive into some of the sports that you've worked with back in the day before, obviously now pivoting to working mostly with baseball. Did you notice a difference between the sports that you worked with related to like mental health needs of, like, for example, like football versus swimming versus volleyball?
I think based on kind of where folks were developmentally, there was a lot of figuring out who they are as people. Who am I in relationships? What kind of friend do I want to be? What's important to me beyond sport? What do I want to do after I graduate? So a lot of kind of just what's developmentally appropriate as an 18 to 24-year-old maybe. So that I think was definitely present. Something that I noticed, and we also see in the research, is our women athletes were typically a little bit more open about some of their struggles and more likely to ask for help. So if I compared my caseload initially, a lot more women than folks who identified as men. And so that would be something that I would be mindful of. Trying to think of other presenting concerns. Things that I think are interesting are the, type of sport and what it subjects them to. So thinking of a basketball player, if you have a turnover, you don't really have time to linger on that error. Yeah. Whereas if you're a golfer and you just hit a really terrible drive, you got to walk 200 yards and you're by yourself. And so you have a lot more time to think about things in competition. It's an interesting dynamic. Then you can also think about team sport versus individual. They might be training as a team, but really competing at more of an individual level until at least conference championships for track and field, compared to, the women's volleyball team that's trying to be successful as an entire unit. Those are a couple things that come to mind, but if I'm thinking about more clinical, like depression versus anxiety versus relationship concerns, honestly, I feel like it's sprinkled everywhere.
Yeah, one of the terms I've seen in the research is, quote, diffusion of responsibility, that on team sports, if something goes wrong, like the whole team can sort of accept fault or whatever, versus if it's an individual sport. There's a lot of internalized guilt that goes on, and then you're like stuck with it. I loved that example that you provided with on the golf course. Certainly happens to me after several errant shots. Tommy, I know that you had something coming up.
No, I'm a stretch.
Or you feel the same way that I do on the golf course.
Me
No,
too. Me too.
I never get frustrated. Actually, no, I just stay off the golf course and I don't have to deal with that. I play tennis and, Mark, we need to get out there and hit because, you just hit one shot and then you're on to the next one, like Tess was saying. No, I guess transitioning to what you're talking about, and I thought it was interesting that females were approaching more for care. Did you have more self referrals or were athletic
Mm.
trainers? Because often we get referrals from athletic trainers as well as other people, right? Were they more interested in, referring the female athlete versus the male athletes? I wonder if there was any bias there.
Hmm. I mean, it is a good question. I don't know if I have a fully thought out answer, so I'll sort of think out loud through this. There were a good number of folks that were self referrals. I think one of the biggest catalysts for those self referrals was doing team related sessions. So if I did a session, players would be like, huh, that was interesting. Can we talk a little bit more about that? And then it would open up kind of Pandora's box. And we're talking about, we're no longer talking about imagery. We're talking about family and relationships and childhood and things. So that's where most of the referrals, I think, would really come from, or maybe good conversations, like I said, at lunch or on a practice or at an outreach event. But athletic trainers were and continue to be really great allies. I kind of joke like they're the barbers or the bartenders of the sports
Yeah.
world, right? Come sit down on the table and they're there for 30, 40 minutes. They're going to probably just talk and share what's going on. And so athletic trainers, in my experience, have an opportunity to be really great sources of support, and then recognizing too, like, hey, that sounds like it's really impacting you. Have you thought about talking to Tess about that? Sometimes you're met with an immediate no. Okay, we can talk a little bit more about why you're so resistant. But then athletic trainers can also say, I've noticed this person had a bit of a change in behavior. They seem to be isolating a little more. They can tell me these things. So then I can have an opportunity to just check in. Hey, how are you? You seemed a little quieter today. Is everything all right? Kind of explain them as drive-bys of, I know you're going to be at practice, or I know when you're going to be lifting. And I can kind of make a really pointed intention to have a check-in. That gives them the opportunity to decide, am I ready to, does this feel safe at this time to have these conversations?
Well, I think you coined probably the new title of a great conversation to happen at the next NATA meeting, which is like the barbers and bartenders of the field.
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful because they definitely are. They're the ones that hear everything, so they're
Yes.
huge allies. I did want to ask a little bit about insurance coverage as far as just being sort of a tricky area, especially within collegiate athletics. Did you ever run into a challenge with athletes that are trying to access care outside of campus?
Yeah. Been actually quite lucky when I was in college athletics that most of my clients were able to get the support they needed on campus. So we didn't have to do a ton of referrals. Now, where I did start making referrals was when folks were graduating and they didn't have access to some of the student athlete resources anymore. So for me, what I had done and what I continue to do is have my list of trusted colleagues have their insurance information at the ready, as well as their presenting concerns, be able to make an effective referral in that way.
Yeah.
I do know, based on conversations with some of my colleagues, that some athletic departments are able to cover some of the costs of external resources. So if, let's say, it's either a wait list here or we can refer out, if they refer out, they'll cover that. Unfortunately, not all institutions are in that place. And I also
Yeah.
don't know how revenue sharing is going to complicate matters as funds are spread thin. But I do think that varies a little bit depending on the institution, and even if they require certain student athletes to have insurance and so forth.
Yeah,
Yeah, it does
transitions are so difficult in sport. Transitions in life are difficult. Whether an athlete's retiring or you're a collegiate athlete in between seasons or summers or holidays. How did things work when you were in that position with out of state, across state lines, all the stuff we dealt with, we deal with regularly since COVID, but was that a challenge? Did the universities that you worked with, did they support you with that?
A lot of our student athletes stuck around during summers to continue training or maybe enroll in additional course work. Some were also from the state of Florida. So that really made both of those made things easy. And then sometimes it's kind of funny, but they'd be like, honestly, school's done, sport's done. I'm good. I don't even need any additional support right now. I just get to go be with my friends, or I get to go spend time with my family, whoever their support system was. So those were some of the ways in which it was not so challenging. But I also recognize there can be challenges if someone's outside of the state. Maybe they don't have insurance coverage, as we were just talking about. But again, I felt pretty lucky there. And in addition, COVID, there were a lot of challenges that came with COVID. But one of the big bright spots for me is how accessible and normalized virtual services had become. So whether you're a PsyPac provider and you can practice in 42 states as a licensed psychologist, that really does open things up. And so really good from a continuity of care standpoint.
Yeah, or you're Dr. Mark Allen and you're licensed in like 57 states. I don't know how he does that.
Great. It's pretty great for me.
Yeah.
26 and counting, I think, at this point. Yeah, it's absurd.
So I got one, and I know we want to talk professional. I want to get there, but I'm very intrigued because I work with some different NCAA programs. Was this protocolized going back to those meetings? Because you got a lot of individual buy-in from group meetings, and so you did group team education. You protocolized, it sounds like, was this the beginning of the season or even preseason where you did the team session? And did you have coaches and athletic trainers present there, or was it just athletes?
For team sessions at the very beginning, coaches were there. They had a role in that of kind of setting expectations and also setting the stage of, hey, this is really important. Listen to what is about to be spoken about. And these are resources here to help you succeed. So that was really great. Moving forward, I certainly didn't have a very specific protocol. It would be one-on-one conversations, coaches saying, hey, I'm really noticing our team struggling when it gets to these high pressure moments. Can we do something with this? Or whatever they were noticing. And then we would kind of talk through what I think could be helpful for them. And so, of course, there were times where presenting concerns was similar across teams, and you can kind of tailor it to match the need and be specific to that sport and the group as you get to know them. But then I had some sessions with teams where coaches were present, and ones where maybe I was asking them to be a little bit more vulnerable or share more of themselves. Then we didn't have coaches present. But then what I think was really powerful too is, hey, if we're talking about these important things, we're talking about team values or goals or what this all means and how we want to operate as a group, we got to loop in coaches. They're the leaders here. So I'd say coaches are going to come in the last 15 minutes. And so let's, as a group, figure out how we want to share this message. What are our takeaways? And then the players, I'd give them the ownership. Now, how do you want to communicate this to your coach? I guess that's a little bit of a long-winded way of saying it depends. Some with coaches, some without coaches. Some I did only staff trainings as well, and no players were actually there. So bit of a mixed bag.
All right. So amazing. So I loved our discussion of collegiate athletics, and it was really refreshing to hear just how personalized your approach was as a newly anointed director of student athlete mental health at Florida Atlantic, where you actually met with every athlete independently. And it was clear to me just how easy it was for them to feel comfortable to actually seek help. And no doubt your utilization rate was appropriately high, relatively speaking, because they're actually getting the help they need. So shifting gears, let's talk some baseball. Can you walk us through what being a mental health coordinator for a pro baseball team is like day to day?
Yes. Kind of jumping back to something I said earlier, I really enjoy my job because every day looks so different. And so I'll share a few pieces that I do most days. First being, I often attend what we call our performance staff meetings. So that's our athletic trainers or physical therapists, strength and conditioning coaches, nutrition, sports science, mental performance. Our whole team gets together and we kind of prep, okay, what do we have on the agenda today? Where is someone in their progression and return to play? What's their pitch count today? Things of that nature. Maybe mental performance is saying, hey, I'm having a talk today at 2. All staff are welcome. We'd love you to attend. So that's a really good way to connect with the staff. That's also an opportunity for me to then ask, hey, is there anyone you want me to check in with today or things you want me to be mindful of? And so
it's like morning rounds.
Yes.
Because I mean, yeah, and who's leading the meeting? I didn't mean to cut you off, but like this is great. You got all the specialties in one room, well, the virtual room, I'm sure, talking about who's needing help that day.
Yes, yes. And so we have that at every level. And so I might not attend our rehab group every day, but I do prioritize that at least once a week to make sure I'm connected amongst all of our groups or within all of our groups. I usually attend and have meals with our staff and players. After that, I might pop over to the kitchen, see what's for breakfast, ask some of the players if I can join them. We chat about things. And for me, that's a really great way to build relationships. So
Yeah.
we're talking about things like, well, what did you do this weekend? And they're like, well, I watched a lot of football. I'm like, oh, who's your team? Where'd you go to college? And so we're able to build the connections. Or did you watch that new movie that came out? And my hope then is they're getting to know me as a bit of a more of a person instead of just the, Dr. Tess that's over on the side over here. And then if something comes up, they know that they can ask. But that's also things. We have had a number of players have children lately. How are the kids doing? How's your sleep? Oh my goodness. And checking in on family as well. I try to get out on the field at times. So that might be for throwing program, hanging out in the cages with them, watching a live BP, something of that nature. And then, of course, individual clients, connecting with coaches and staff if they have any questions or things that they're needing support on as well. So in my role, I'm based in Florida, but I do visit all of our teams in New York as well. So that's another way the days vary of I might not be in the same state or same country.
And
So you're
bonding
treating
over
like
food.
I love it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Food,
You know, that's
sports, and Netflix.
that is not a bad perk. I
Great.
know, my experience with quote unquote big league bacon, it's better in those clubhouses somehow than anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
What is a quick fun question though? You travel a little bit with the team, I take it. Where is the best food in America as far as big league ballparks?
I mean, I gotta give it to our major league chefs. We have incredible chefs in our clubhouse. So when I go there, it's hard to not eat everything because I don't know how they do it. They make that many steaks and they're all perfect. So I'm biased. I'd say our big leagues.
How about
I mean,
you and
have
your
you,
team? I guess, tell me a little bit about the makeup of your team and how you guys sustain without burnout over a 162 game season.
Yeah. When you say my team, are you meaning our players or our mental health staff?
I'm talking mental health. I'm talking you're coordinating a group that's very important, maybe sometimes under the radar, but very important to that 162 game season.
Yeah. I feel pretty fortunate in our setup here. We actually have two distinct departments. So we have our mental health department, which I'm in, and then we also have our mental performance department. So when we think about responsibilities, we've already halved what I was at before. I'm no longer responsible for the mental performance work. And so that allows me to really dive in and do hopefully a good job with the mental health side of things. We also have two contracted providers, one based here in Florida who's bilingual, which has been outstanding as he's been able to reach a big part of our population that I was not able to, given how my Spanish is not quite where it needs to be. And then we have another provider that's based up in New York as well. She's been with our big league team for 6 seasons now. So that was pretty cool too, of coming in and having folks that have already been here. For us, I think whether it's baseball or any other setting, I try to practice what I preach. And so that for me, that means turning off, stepping away from work at times. Again, having a team, I feel very lucky if have to attend a wedding this weekend, which I do, we have our other provider who will kind of be on call and ready to field a phone call if an emergency or something that needed attention right away. They would go to her. And so that allows me to be kind of fully present and engaged with life outside of work as well. I think those are a couple of the big ones. And then just having a team has been really beneficial. So when we have a challenging day or we're kind of feeling stuck in a case or don't really know how to approach this or just need feedback really on ideas, we have our staff meetings once a week. And so that has been really great to, again, just bounce ideas off one another, get support. also just have an opportunity to check in, like, how are you doing? And just be there for each other. Those are a couple things that come to mind.
I was going to ask about crisis response, but you already nailed it. Like related to you have in team cross coverage already set up. You got preventative meetings that are happening nearly daily, where people are talking about like you're getting ahead of that is exactly what should be happening. That's only like a model for the rest of the league and other pro organizations, by the way.
Appreciate.
I do wonder about when young players come into the organization, maybe for the first time, or rookies that are having that transition. How do you approach having them have a soft landing?
So when we first draft players, they are within days, they're on site, they're here. And so we spoke about mental health screening, and that's exactly what I do. As soon as they get here, they're completing a mental health screener, and we're having a beginning of year meeting, one-on-one. So it's an opportunity for me to introduce myself, share a little bit about the resources in place. Hopefully we're connecting over something, whether they just came from a college where I know that the head of sports psychology there. Then we'll talk a little bit about their mental health screener. Often I've caught them on the best week of their life if they just got drafted. So they're not usually expressing too much concerns. But that's also for them a learning opportunity of, hey, if something's going on with sleep or you're feeling really stressed or overwhelmed, those are the kinds of things that we can talk about. Then they get my phone number. They know where my office is. They know how to get a hold of me and ask for support if and when they need it. And I also remind them, I'll be around. You'll see me quite frequently. And to be sure also to say hello. And so what I think is really great is right from day one, we're normalizing you chat with me, and everybody does at some point. And then some take advantage right away, and some say I'm okay, and they'll let me know if they need something down the road.
Yeah. So last thing that I have on pro baseball and mental health, just pro sports and mental health, I think you're seeing an evolution of different types of makeups of those mental skills and mental health and wellness teams. Is there anything that over the years that you feel like is missing or, is lacking in that ideal setup? Because what I hear is this, okay, we're doing a good job triaging now to mental health and mental skills. And I guess the follow-up is Mark and I, we're psychiatrists. We've worked with pro athletes. Where do you see the psychiatrist? We know some of the sports psychiatrists and baseball that, we interact with, Tess. Where do you think the future lies with interaction with the medical team and the psychiatrist?
That, it's a great question. And I don't know if there's a single right answer. Because as I talk to my colleagues, even just within MLB, and ask, what's your setup? Wait, what's your credential? What's your background? Everybody is so different. So I am running our mental health department, and I'm a licensed psychologist, but I have a colleague I call all the time who's a psychiatrist running their mental health department. Then I have a colleague who's, a master's level clinician and does both mental health and mental performance work. And so what I think we are recognizing is there's not a single right way to do this. There's going to be benefits to every setup. And with that too comes maybe a potential drawback. But I think one thing that I'm really proud of is just our ability to work with others. So we have our relationships in-house. So mental performance is a great ally for me. Again, kind of similar to some athletic trainers that, our players build really good relationships with our mental performance coaches. And with that, they should then share things with them. So mental performance can help them get connected with me. Same way as when we're talking about more personal stuff or life stuff off the field. If baseball skill related stuff or mental skill related stuff comes in, I refer over to mental performance. So in-house, I think our communication is great. We've also worked from an external referral standpoint. And so just knowing that you have folks who have the training, have the understanding of what's going on for our population can really fully support them, and we can work together as an integrated team. I think that's some of what's going really well.
Yeah, collaborative and athlete informed for sure.
Yeah, and I've also seen the benefit of mental performance coaches doing the day-to-day grind of identity-based work and values-based work, especially as someone who might be also transitioning out of sport, but also within the moment. And I also can kind of talk about mental health through a destigmatized lens, which is sort of what's been around for many, many years. But now there's actually a separate mental health department to take care of it in the forefront. I do wonder a little bit about the difference between having worked with professional athletes and student athletes as far as the approach that you might take and just kind of working within the two environments. What would you say are the biggest differences?
Yeah. One thing is once they get to pro, baseball is, depending on the person, and again, there's going to be some variation, but baseball is their number one priority. And when they leave work, they don't have classes. They
Yeah.
don't have homework. And so while some say, oh, this is great, I don't have to worry about school anymore, or eligibility or whatever it might be, some say, kind of miss that because baseball can become all consuming. So and you have to adapt to the lifestyle, whether you're, if you're on the day schedule, well, what are you doing come 3 or 4 p.m.? Because you got a few hours till bedtime. What can you do that's safe? Within your budget, those sorts of things. Or if you're on the night schedule, again, what are you doing in the mornings before you head to the clubhouse? And so I think that's a big one, being away from family. And so that might be being away from your parents and siblings. For many of our players, it's being away from their partners and children. And that is really hard. You miss a lot of life events. You don't have the opportunity to go home for a wedding. You can't call in sick. Well, if you really are sick, you can take your sick days, but you can't just say, I'm going to take my PTO this week and
Yeah.
go spend some time on vacation. So there's a little bit less flexibility. And when they're in off season or it's the dead period, they're still working every day. So I think it's a very challenging lifestyle. I think people on the outside see the glitz and the glam and the paychecks. But the reality is it is really challenging and really demanding.
Yeah. And if they're working every day, your team's working every day. And so wonder what is that advice maybe that you'd give to a young, professional or student who's thinking, listening and hoping to pursue a path into sports psychology? What advice might you have for someone who's on that path?
Figure out boundaries. I don't know many who have really figured it out, so to speak, but I guess maybe the better way to put that would be mindful of and revisit your boundaries. Even I can recall I was preaching, balance is so important and you can't work all the time. We have to take care of ourselves or we can't take care of others. And then I saw how many hours of the week I was working after I calculated. That was a big reality check of I need to start practicing what I preach. I need to step away. More is not always more. And so being able to be okay with progress not always being linear, and it's always, it's not always like this. Sometimes it's like this. Get yourself a good support system. Get yourself support that folks in the field as well as take advantage of your support networks that have nothing to do with sport or psychology or psychiatry. That's been really big for me, my family, friends, partner.
I agree. Okay, we're moving on to lightning round.
Okay.
We already talked about food, but I want to ask you specifically, what is your favorite ballpark food?
It's got to be hot dogs. No
Good
questions asked.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Hey, Mark,
Tommy?
did I see something this morning that they're making little mini hot dogs for those people who want to drink 9 beers and eat 9 hot dogs?
Oh, Lordy. Oh,
during
it's the
the game?
999 challenge.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know
Yeah.
what team it was. Tess, did you see what team that was?
I think it was the Phillies, if I'm
I
not
think it was.
mistaken.
Shocker.
All right, we're going to get Dr. Nobleza on, and we're going to ask her about that and the mental health implications, but that's for another episode. All right, moving on. If you had a walk-up song, what would it be, Tess?
Ooh, I've thought about this, and I don't know if I have a perfect answer, but what I'm trending to, I think it might have to be AC/DC. We were listening to AC/DC before when my parents would drive me to soccer or volleyball. It was always their music. So yeah, maybe Thunderstruck or something like that.
I love it. I'm thinking like Travis Hoffman coming out to Hell's Bells too. Tommy, do you have a walk-up song?
Wait, I thought I wasn't on the hot seat. This is for everybody, Mark?
I'm going to go ahead and hit you too. Yeah.
No, it would have to be something classic. You know, my 8-year-old son just picked his walk-up song, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, and they're playing it for these 8-year-olds now, which their egos are getting way too big. You know, I would go something classic too. I don't know, Metallica, something like that, or something lighthearted or country. I can't decide, Mark. What's yours?
Well, no, you're going to say Metallica with Entertainment. That was Rivera's walk-up song. Remember, we're talking to the Mets right now, not the Yankees. No, mine. I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say Lagrange by ZZ Top. But my kids will like immediately stop what they're doing, run right to the speaker. I have a 1 and a 3-year-old, and just start bopping to it. So like with that long intro, which is fun. So anyway, okay. Favorite stadium other than Citi Field, obviously, that you visited?
Haven't been to many,
Yeah.
but last season it was pretty cool. I got to head back to Toronto, go to the Jays Stadium on my birthday. That was pretty cool. Being out there while they're opening up the roof, that's probably been a highlight.
I remember going when I was, I think, 8 years old, maybe, right when the Sky Dome opened, and it was the coolest thing ever. It was like, I mean, it was like way better than the Astrodome. Anyway, there's a story along with it that I'll share another time where I actually had met the A's, like their infield and some of their pitching staff at a Chinese restaurant, and I'm like, I like pointed out their second baseman at the other table. Anyway, they got us tickets, which was pretty fun. Tommy, what did you, what did you have?
You know, I had my first Dodger dog this year, so
Yeah.
in LA. So I'd say that comes to mind. How about you, Mark?
Ooh, I went to my first game in Baltimore this past season, and I have to say the retro vibe was magical at Camden. There's just something about it because it was the same architect that made that field, that made my hometown in Dallas, the original ballpark in Arlington, that vibe with like the red brick. And so I really got behind it. Also, McDuff, I'm sure would be happy with that answer.
Yeah, very
Tommy,
friendly.
you're up next.
Very friendly ballpark there with the Orioles. Rookie or veteran? So day one of the season, who is easier to talk to, the new rookie or the veteran?
Yeah, I feel stuck on that. I feel, we've had really friendly veterans that are showing me around and introducing themselves, and then we got the rookies who I can kind of leverage where we both don't know where something is, and we can bond over trying to find things together. So both.
By that. Okay. So this might be even a harder question because I understand that you're newer to baseball, but you're living it and breathing it every day. If you could sit down for a dugout conversation with any baseball legend, past or present.
This is a tough one for me because admittedly, I grew up watching hockey. I did not grow up watching baseball. And I mentioned my dad was a former professional hockey player and then worked for the team. And so I actually had the pretty great fortune of meeting a lot of them, like Johnny Bauer and, trying on Stanley Cup rings and things of that
Amazing.
nature. I think I may have met some of the big ones, at least in the hockey world.
Okay, that's kind of awesome. God, can you tell us a little bit more about your dad and his playing days?
Yes. My dad played for the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Washington Capitals. He played from 76 and 80 till 84. I was not yet born at that point. So my time of watching my dad play was more recently in some of the alumni Winter Classic games. So that was pretty cool. His body is not what it once was. So his minutes, not a lot of minutes in those games, but pretty cool to witness that. It's interesting as a volleyball player in college. At times I struggled a little bit with confidence because I would always identify, could have done this, should have had that dig, and that pass wasn't great. And I would not always give attention to all the things that went really well, which was a stark contrast to my dad, who, to put it blunt, was known for being pretty cocky. Yeah, there's a famous quote when the GM called him up to the Leafs, and he told the GM to his face that his goaltending problems are now over. So yeah, he believed in himself for good reason. So
Hey,
pretty cool hearing some of his stories.
strong confidence can really be helpful sometimes.
Yes, yeah.
That's an awesome
right.
story. And so finally, last one, what is one piece of advice that you leave today that you would give to an athlete about taking care of their mental health?
It's scary as hell, but be vulnerable. And by that, I mean, find people that you trust, that have earned your trust, and try to test the waters and maybe let them in a little bit on how you're doing. If it's not a friend, a teammate, a family member, use the resources that are in place. It can also be really scary talking to a licensed mental health provider for the first time. But when you find someone that's a good fit, my hope is that they work to create a really safe space for you.
Amen. Well, Tess, thanks so much for stepping into the podcast Clubhouse with us today.
From your pioneering work at Florida Atlantic to your current role in pro baseball, your story really shows how mental health can be embedded at every level.
And it's exciting for us to see that bridge, because our own mission at Peak Sports Psychiatry is to strengthen that kind of infrastructure across the athletic spectrum.
And whether it's a college student balancing classes and competition or a pro player grinding through a 162 game season, the need for comprehensive care is universal.
So we'll be cheering you on the rest of the way.
Yeah, even though I know that the end of the season didn't exactly go as we hoped, but next year, right? Next year. Tess, thank you again for joining us. This was a home run.
Thank
love
you
the
so much
corny
for
jokes.
having me.
And thanks to all of you for listening to the Peak Sports Psychiatry Podcast. We'll see you next time.